The department store in Iowa was nothing special by day. Rows of fluorescent lights, glossy mannequins in seasonal clothing, the faint scent of perfume mixed with dust. Families wandered the aisles. Workers folded shirts. Children cried for toys. By closing time, the store became silent, just another empty shell in the middle of the night. That was when I arrived. My job was simple, or so I thought: to walk the floors, check the cameras, lock the doors, and keep watch until morning. I remember my first night vividly, because from the moment I stepped through the staff entrance, the silence felt wrong. Stores are not meant to be empty. They are built to contain movement, chatter, footsteps echoing off tiles. Stripped of that life, the place seemed unnatural, like a hollow body missing its soul. The manager handed me the keys and a worn binder, its edges frayed, its pages thick with handwritten notes. "Read this carefully," he said, his eyes holding mine a second too long. "It's not like other jobs. Follow the rules and you'll be fine." I thought he was joking. Rules? What could be stranger than locking up and checking cameras? The binder was heavier than it looked. Inside were typed regulations mixed with pages clearly added over the years by different hands. Some rules were obvious. Lock all entrances by midnight. Keep the lights dim but not off. Check the cameras hourly. But then came the ones that made no sense. Never look directly at the mannequins for more than 10 seconds. If you hear children laughing after 2 a.m., do not search for them. Under no circumstances ride the elevator after midnight. Do not answer the phone at the service desk after closing hours. No one is calling from outside. I laughed quietly to myself as I flipped through them. Superstition, I thought. A way for board guards to scare new hires. But something about the scrawled handwriting unsettled me. It wasn't written in jest. These were warnings. I began my rounds with a torch and a clipboard, walking through the hushed corridors of the clothing department. My footsteps echoed far louder than they should have. Every aisle seemed to stretch longer than I remembered from the day I toured the place. The mannequins stood frozen in their poses, dressed in summer attire, yet their glassy eyes seemed to follow me as I passed. I told myself it was just reflection, just shadow, but I found myself looking away quickly, never lingering too long on their faces. At 1 a.m., I checked the monitors in the security office. Rows of screens flickered with grainy footage from every corner of the building. For the most part, everything was still. Yet, in the corner of one camera, I thought I saw movement, just a shadow shifting in the toy aisle. When I switched to that feed, the aisle was empty. By 2 a.m., the air in the store had changed. Heavier, thicker, as if the building itself was breathing. The hum of the lights felt louder, buzzing faintly in my skull. And then, as I walked past the children's section, I heard it. Laughter. Faint, distant, high-pitched like children playing hide and seek. My stomach tightened. The binder's warning echoed in my mind. If you hear children laughing after 2 a.m., do not search for them. I froze in place, the beam of my torch trembling against the racks of clothes. The laughter came again, this time closer, skipping between the aisles. I wanted to call out, to convince myself it was just some prankster who had stayed behind. But I didn't. I gripped the torch tighter and kept walking, forcing myself toward the electronics section. The laughter faded. The silence returned. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had noticed me. Something that now knew I was there. When dawn finally arrived and the morning staff began to file in, I left the store with relief heavy in my chest. Sunlight felt unnatural after that night. Too bright, too loud. It was only later, when I opened the binder again, that I noticed something I had missed on my first read. A note scribbled at the bottom of the page. On your first night, you'll hear them. Do not let them know you're listening. And I realized with a cold sinking dread, I hadn't followed the rule. When I got home after that first night, I didn't sleep. The morning sunlight felt too sharp, my curtains too thin, and every time I closed my eyes, I heard that faint laughter again. It wasn't just a sound. It had weight, like an echo carried across my skull. I told myself it was exhaustion, imagination, nerves. But deep down, I knew something had happened in that store. The The binder lay on my kitchen table, staring back at me like an old book of scripture. I flipped through it with a kind of obsession, searching for answers, searching for logic where there was none. The rules weren't just bizarre. They seemed deliberately incomplete, as if written by people who knew the truth but were too afraid to state it plainly. The first section read like a corporate manual. Alarm codes, fire exits, cleaning procedures. But halfway through, the tone shifted. The typed print gave way to scrawled notes in smudged ink. Handwriting changed from page to page, some rushed and messy, others deliberate and almost shaky. I realized this wasn't a single set of rules. It was a collection of warnings left behind by guards who had worked the job before me. There were rules I remembered from my shift. Don't look at the mannequins, don't answer the phone, don't use the elevator. But there were others buried deeper in the pages. If you see your own reflection wave at you from the mirror aisle, do not wave back. At 3:15 exactly, avoid the perfume counters. The smell is not perfume. If you find coins on the floor, leave them. They do not belong to you. Should the store music begin to play after 1 a.m., you must stand completely still until it stops. Do not hum along. Each line drew me further into unease. Who wrote these? And why did they sound like survival tactics rather than workplace guidelines? By the time my second shift rolled around, I was already different. Not the skeptical guard who laughed at superstitions, but someone who carried that binder like a lifeline. I read the rules before clocking in, committing each one to memory. That night began quietly. I walked the aisles, torch in hand, heart steady. The mannequins seemed less threatening than before, though I refused to hold their gaze. I avoided the children's section entirely. The laughter had left a mark on me, and I wasn't eager to test whether it would return. Around 12:30, as I was checking the camera feeds, the store phone rang. The shrill sound sliced through the silence, echoing down the empty corridors. I froze in the security office, staring at the receiver. The rule was clear: do not answer. Yet the phone continued, ringing and ringing, insistent, like something on the other end knew I was listening. I forced myself to breathe, counting each ring until finally it stopped. Silence again. But when I turned back to the monitors, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. In the women's clothing section, one of the mannequins had shifted. She was standing closer to the camera now, her head tilted slightly to the side as if studying the lens. The other mannequins were in place, rigid and unchanging, but not her. Her dress shimmered faintly in the glow of the overhead lights. I blinked, leaned forward, rubbed my eyes. The footage was grainy, but the difference was undeniable. She had moved. I grabbed my torch and left the office, my feet heavy on the linoleum floors. The women's section was a few corridors away, and with each step I regretted leaving the safety of the monitors. But I had to see. I had to prove to myself it was just a trick of the light. When I arrived, the mannequin was back in her original place. Arms bent, chin tilted upward, staring blankly into nothing. I shone the beam across her plastic features, across the glossy smile painted onto her face. She hadn't moved. She couldn't have. But when I turned to leave, my torch caught something on the floor. A shoe print. Not mine. Not from the daytime staff. It was small, delicate, pressed into the dust near the mannequin's stand. And worse, it was fresh. I returned to the office with my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't check the cameras again for the rest of the night. Instead, I sat with the binder open in front of me, scanning for some clue, some line I had missed. Near the very end, in the final pages written in a hand that looked frantic and broken, I found it. They are not statues. They are waiting. And just below it, scrawled in shaky red ink, never turn your back on the mannequins. The shift ended with daylight spilling through the doors, but I walked out feeling as if I hadn't left the building at all. The rules weren't warnings anymore, they were chains. Chains I couldn't ignore. Chains that were tightening around me with every night I returned. By the third night, I no longer thought of the mannequins as props. They were something else, something that only pretended to be still. I could feel it in the way the air thickened around them, in the way shadows clung to their forms long after I'd moved the torch away. They had become the pulse of the store, silent sentinels that somehow grew more aware of me the longer I worked there. I started my shift the same as always, keys at my side, binder under my arm. But this time I entered the store with a ritual of my own. I whispered the rules under my breath like prayers. Don't stare too long. Don't turn your back. Don't answer the phone. Don't ride the lift. Repetition calmed me, though deep down I knew I was clinging to them as if they were charms against something much older and far more dangerous than company superstition. The first hour passed uneventfully. My torch cut through the darkness, and the cameras hummed with their usual static. But when I reached the women's section, I stopped cold. There were more mannequins. I knew the arrangement by heart now, for on the central platform, 2 near the changing rooms, 3 facing the aisle. Tonight, there were 5 on the platform, and 1 leaned against the wall near the security gate. Their painted eyes gleamed in the low light, watching me, unblinking. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen anyone wheel them in. There had been no deliveries that day, no rearrangement of stock. Yet here they were, standing as if they had always belonged. I turned away, unwilling to linger. The rules echoed again. Never turn your back. But how was I supposed to watch them all? There were too many now, too many pairs of eyes fixed on me. My torch flickered as I left, the battery suddenly weaker, as though the store itself was conspiring against me. Back in the office, I stared at the monitors with a kind of desperate obsession. If I could see them move, I'd have proof. But the mannequins never moved on the screens. They only moved when I wasn't watching. That thought festered like rot in my mind. Around 2:10, as I scribbled notes onto the log sheet, I heard a sound that chilled me. A soft scrape like plastic sliding across tile. It came from the corridor outside the office. Torch in hand, I pushed the door open slowly. The corridor stretched empty in both directions, silent and still. But on the floor, just a few feet from the office door, lay a mannequin's hand. The fingers were curled slightly, as though it had been reaching for something. I scanned the corridor again, throat dry. No mannequins in sight, no sign of movement. I crouched, staring at the hand. It was heavy, cold, glossy. Not broken, no cracks, no damage. Just detached, as if the mannequin had willingly discarded it. I left it there. I wasn't about to touch something that clearly didn't want to be touched. When I returned to the monitors, my stomach dropped. On camera 7, near the perfume counters, stood a mannequin with 1 arm missing, and it was facing the office. I gripped the binder with clammy fingers, flipping through pages with frantic urgency, looking for guidance. Somewhere, in messy scrawl between 2 coffee-stained sheets, I found a line that felt like it had been written directly for me. If they leave something behind, do not return it. It is a trap. That was enough for me. I didn't move from the office for the rest of the shift. I sat in my chair, binder pressed to my chest, torch aimed at the door. And though the mannequins stayed frozen on the screens, I couldn't shake the sense that, just beyond those blank eyes, they were smiling. When morning came, the hand was gone. So was the armless mannequin. Everything looked normal again, as if the night had been nothing but imagination. But it wasn't imagination. I had seen it. I had heard it. And worst of all, I knew the mannequins were not finished with me. By my 4th night, the rules were no longer just words on paper. They were chains around my every movement, guiding me through the store like invisible hands steering me away from danger. I followed them with blind obedience, because every time I even brushed against breaking one, something stirred in the shadows. Something that wanted me to slip. The one rule that unsettled me most was simple. Do not use the elevator after midnight. It seemed almost laughable at first. Why would anyone need to? The store wasn't tall, just 2 floors connected by escalators and 1 staff lift at the far end of the building. But the way the rule was written, scrawled in shaky ink and underlined twice, hinted at something more sinister. Someone hadn't just written it. Someone had feared it. That night, I kept to my rounds, avoiding the mannequin aisles as best I could. The binder had become my constant companion, tucked under my arm as if it could shield me. I repeated its words silently in my head. No phone, no lift, No mirrors, no laughter. It almost felt like a chant, a rhythm that kept me sane in the dead quiet of the store. At exactly 12:17, as I passed through the corridor near the staff break room, I heard the hum of machinery. A low mechanical drone, followed by a metallic shudder, came from the direction of the lift. I froze, torchlight trembling against the walls. The lift should have been silent, locked down for the night. Yet here it was, groaning as though carrying weight. The sound grew louder, the scrape of cables, the thud of something heavy shifting inside. Then came the unmistakable ding of arrival. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer, peering down the corridor. The lift doors slid open with a hiss. Inside was nothing but black. Not the dim gray of an unlit shaft, but a darkness that seemed to swallow even the torch beam. My light hit the doors, the frame, the tiles around it, but the interior remained a void, depthless and wrong. I gripped the binder tighter. The rule was clear: do not use the elevator after midnight. But the rule had said nothing about what to do if it opened on its own. The doors lingered, yawning wide as if waiting for me. A faint smell wafted out, thick and metallic, like rust mixed with stagnant water. I felt my stomach tighten, and in that moment, I swore I saw movement within the black. Shadows folding in on themselves, shifting as though something was breathing inside. The intercom above the lift crackled suddenly. A distorted voice rasped through, fractured by static. Ground floor. The words clawed at me, hollow, mechanical, yet not entirely inhuman. My legs urged me to run, but my curiosity chained me in place. Then, before I could move, the doors began to close. Just as the gap narrowed, a pale hand shot out from the darkness, slamming against the metal frame. The doors jolted and slid open again. The hand wasn't human. Its fingers were too long, too thin, the skin smooth like porcelain but cracked around the joints. It was the hand of a mannequin. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the binder. The hand retreated into the void, vanishing as though it had never been there. The doors slammed shut with a violent hiss, and the hum of the lift fell silent once more. For the rest of the night, I avoided that corridor entirely. My rounds were shorter, tighter, focused only on keeping myself alive until dawn. But as I sat in the office later, my hands still shaking, I found another scribbled note in the binder that I hadn't noticed before. It was buried in the margin beside the rule about the lift, written so faintly it almost disappeared into the page. If the lift opens, do not look inside for too long. It is hungry. That word, hungry, stuck with me long after the shift ended. Because the truth gnawed at my mind. The mannequins weren't the only things moving in that store, and some of them wanted me inside. By the fifth night, I had started to dread one place above all others. Not the toy section with its phantom laughter, not the elevator that yawned with hunger, not even the mannequins who seemed to multiply when I wasn't watching. No, the place that sank cold dread deepest into my stomach was the mirror aisle. It was an ordinary corridor by day, lined with full-length mirrors for customers to check outfits. Bright lights, clean reflections, nothing out of the ordinary. But by night, when the store was silent and the overheads dimmed, the mirrors changed. They no longer reflected the store as it was. They reflected something else, something almost right, but not quite. The rule for this section was clear, written in bold ink by a trembling hand. If you see your reflection wave at you, do not wave back. At first, I dismissed it. Superstition. Paranoia. But every guard before me had written the same warning, sometimes underlined, sometimes with added words like serious or never ever. It was the kind of warning you couldn't ignore, even if you didn't believe. That night, I made the mistake of walking through the mirror aisle with my torch raised. My reflection followed dutifully in each panel of glass, its movements matching mine. But the longer I walked, the more I noticed differences. My reflection's eyes seemed darker, sunken, like bruises circling the sockets. Its posture was wrong, slouched as though bearing some invisible weight. Once or twice, I thought I caught its lips twitching into a smile when mine remained grim and tight. Halfway down the aisle, I stopped. My reflection stopped too, but not perfectly. It tilted its head slightly, as if studying me with curiosity. My stomach knotted, bile rising in my throat. I flicked the torch away, aiming it at the floor, and forced myself forward. That's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, one reflection moved its arm. It wasn't a shift caused by my torchlight, nor the angle of the glass. No, I had kept my hands at my sides. But in the mirror, my reflection lifted its arm slowly, deliberately, and gave me a small, unnatural wave. My chest clenched so tight I couldn't breathe. Every muscle screamed at me to return the gesture, to wave back, as if some unspoken law of courtesy bound me to respond. My hand twitched, desperate to move against my will. But the rule echoed in my skull. Do not wave back. I shoved both hands into my pockets, nails digging into my palms, and forced myself to walk. Each step felt like dragging my body through quicksand. My reflection's arm stayed raised, waving with a slow, sickening persistence. Its smile widened until the corners of its mouth split unnaturally, stretching too far across its face. When I finally reached the end of the aisle, I dared a glance over my shoulder. My reflection hadn't followed. It was still there, frozen in that impossible grin, hand mid-wave, eyes fixed on me as though it had been waiting centuries for that moment. I stumbled into the office, shaking so hard I could barely hold the binder. Flipping through its pages, I found notes I had missed before. Scrawls in different handwriting, written at different times. They want you to acknowledge them. The moment you wave, you are theirs. Never, ever stop in front of the mirrors. That night, I avoided the cameras that overlooked the aisle. I couldn't stand the thought of seeing those reflections again, of watching them move when I wasn't moving. But still, as I sat in the dim hum of the office, I felt eyes on me. Not from the mannequins this time. From the glass, waiting, patient, hoping I'd return the gesture. And I knew, with an awful certainty, that the reflections were growing bolder. Next time, they wouldn't just wave. By the sixth night, exhaustion had begun to weigh on me. Every shift felt longer than the last, every aisle heavier with silence, every rule harder to obey. I hadn't told anyone outside the job what was happening, partly because I didn't want to sound insane, and partly because I suspected that speaking about it aloud might make it worse, like giving something nameless too much attention. That night, when I arrived at the staff entrance, there was already someone waiting there. A man in a security uniform like mine, leaning casually against the wall with a clipboard in his hand. His posture was loose, his expression calm, but something about him felt off. "You must be the new guy," he said with a faint smile. His voice was smooth, low, friendly enough to sound convincing, yet it carried no warmth. I froze with the keys halfway to the lock. Nobody had mentioned another guard. My manager had been clear on the first night. This was a solo job. I worked the hours, I followed the rules, I clocked out at dawn. There was no mention of partners, shifts, or rotations. Still, I nodded because what else was I supposed to do? He introduced himself, though the name slipped from my mind almost immediately, like water poured through a sieve. He fell into step beside me as I unlocked the entrance and flicked on the dim safety lights. We walked the aisles together, and though he looked every bit the part of a night guard, nothing about him settled right. His shoes made no sound on the floor. His torch didn't flicker when he switched it on. And though his lips moved as though he were talking, I realized halfway through the patrol that I couldn't remember a single word he had said. When we reached the women's section, he stopped and looked at the mannequins. "They've been restless tonight," he murmured, almost as if to himself. My stomach lurched. The binder never mentioned anything about restless. I wanted to ask what he meant, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I glanced at him, and that's when I noticed it. His reflection in the glass storefront wasn't standing beside me. It was standing several feet behind, watching us both. I forced myself to keep walking, my pulse roaring in my ears. The binder rules hammered in my head, though none of them addressed this. There were no lines about strange coworkers, no warnings about men in uniform. Or so I thought. Back in the office, while the stranger busied himself with the monitors, I opened the binder under the desk, flipping quickly through the pages. There it was, scrawled in a frantic, jagged hand between the rules about the phone and the lift. If you are not scheduled to work with someone, you are not working with someone. Do not trust them. The words nearly made me drop the book. My breath came in shallow bursts. I looked up slowly at the man, who sat in the chair beside me, eyes fixed on the grainy feeds of the store. His expression was calm, almost too calm, as though carved into his face. Then, without looking at me, he said softly, "You should never read that binder while I'm here." The air went still. My throat closed. How did he know? I hadn't spoken a word, hadn't made a sound. Yet he knew. The rest of the night dragged on like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. He followed me on rounds, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind, but never quite where he should have been. His reflection continued to lag in the glass, out of sync with his body. By dawn, he was gone. No farewell, no sign he had ever been there at all. But when I checked the binder again at home, I noticed something new. A line written in handwriting I didn't recognize, still wet with fresh ink, as though it had been waiting for me. He will return. Do not follow him when he asks. I slammed the book shut and stared at the cover, dread spreading through me like ice. Whoever or whatever that man was, he wasn't finished with me. And the rules had just become far more complicated. The intercom had always been a dull, practical thing. A metal throat that coughed announcements about closing times and staff reminders. By day it was unremarkable. Cheery voices telling customers about sales. The manager reminding staff to restock a shelf. The muffled crackle of corporate messages that meant nothing beyond the fluorescent light. But by night, when the store folded in on itself and the lights dimmed to a safe, watchful glow, the intercom became something else entirely. A mouth that breathed where mouths should not. The first time it spoke to me directly, it was subtle, a soft click followed by a hiss like a kettle left to simmer, and I told myself it was just an old system misfiring. Then the voice came, low and patient, whispering a string of numbers that meant nothing to me. But the tone was knowing, intimate, as if the metal had learned to remember names. I froze, hands cold on the binder, remembering the scribble about phones and the lift and the mirrors, about not answering because no one was really calling from outside. The intercom went quiet and all I had was the echo of those numbers in my head. The sensation that the building had just addressed me by some secret code. After that, I began to dread the soft hum above the entrance, and I found myself listening for the tiniest scratch in the wiring, as if it might be the prelude to a sentence aimed straight at me. Nights changed. The intercom no longer announced sales. It practiced speech it had never known in daylight. Sometimes it replayed old recordings in a warped cadence. The daytime smiles turned thin and sour by the night. Other times it made sounds like someone clearing their throat deep in an empty throat, like a throat preparing words it never intended to finish. On the 8th night, it started calling out times, 3 figures repeated over and over, 3:15, 3:15, 3:15, then a soft, layered giggle that could have been children or could have been teeth scraping glass. I remembered the note in the binder about perfume counters and the exact minute you must not be near certain displays. And a cold spin of dread rolled through me because the intercom had chosen a time and the rules always seemed to arrive just ahead of whatever happened next. The voice changed with nights, sometimes male, sometimes female, sometimes a chorus that sounded like a dozen mouths trying to speak through one throat. It used cadence it knew would rattle a person's bones. It used half-words that your mind supplied meaning for, until you were completing sentences it had never finished. The worst thing was not the voice itself but how the store seemed to lean in to listen. Shelves breathed, the squeak of a loan will muted into reverence, and even the mannequins stiffened as if proud that someone had finally given them a broadcast. I started timing my rounds around the intercom's oddities, because pattern made me feel safe. When it clicked at 3:15, I would be in the staff kitchen, kettle boiling for an imaginary tea I never drank, training my eyes on the door so I would not be caught in the perfume aisle when the wrong scent spread. But then the voice started naming things. It would rattle off innocuous words, shoes, checkout, window, and then with a slight delay that felt personal, it would name a coat I owned, an old joke I'd told weeks earlier, the name of the street where my mother lived. Once it said my nickname, a name no one at the store used, a private word I had not spoken in years, and the sound of it over those tinny speakers felt like a hand on the back of my neck. I stopped bringing the binder home. Instead, I carried it with me to the office and slept with it on my lap like a talisman. Each scribbled line felt more urgent, more desperate, as if the guards who had written them had been trying to teach me how to be unreadable, how to be unseen by sound. The intercom's vocabulary grew bolder. It began to issue invitations, small, polite requests that a person might ignore if they were not already weakened by the night. "Please come see the shoes," it would croon, or, "We have a seat for you by the perfume counter." They sounded like offers at first, not threats, and the difference between the two was the cruelest trap. The human brain wants to obey hospitality. It wants to accept even the smallest kindness in an empty place. That's why the rule existed in the binder. Do not respond to invitations. Saying yes was the same as stepping through a door you couldn't close. The night the intercom asked me to just look behind the mirrors, I almost stood up, every fiber pulled toward that corridor, my feet ready to move before my head gave permission. I clenched my jaw and forced myself not to act, counting in my head until the voice faded into static like a tide receding. I have no idea how long I sat there, heart thudding, the taste of metal in my mouth. When dawn came and the morning crew buzzed in with their warm noise and bright coffee, I walked out with the binder under my arm and an ache that felt like a bruise in my chest. I didn't tell them about the voices. You don't tell people about the things that speak through the store's throat. They either laugh or they don't understand, and the moment you talk aloud you make yourself audible. Instead, I wrote it down in the margins, small and cramped, adding a line so it would be there for whoever followed me. If the intercom ever speaks your secret, treat it as a lie. Do not answer its invitations. Do not step where it suggests. It learns when you obey. I read that note in the early morning, in the thin safety of daylight, and tried to convince myself it was only a system glitch, a haunted reel of old announcements playing out of order. But the next night the intercom said softly the words I had just written, the exact phrasing, my handwriting's rhythm given back to me in a cold mechanical timbre, and something in me, the part that had not yet been taken, understood that it had been listening the whole time. I left at dawn with a new rule carved into memory. Treat the store's voice as a beggar that never sleeps and never forgets. Do not answer. Do not follow. And for the love of your own quiet, do not stand still when it tells you to. There are many rules written in the binder, but the one that seemed almost laughable at first was scrawled in a slanted hand across an entire page. If you see customers after 3 in the morning, do not approach. Do not offer help. Do not let them see you watching. At the time, it struck me as absurd. What customer wanders into a department store long after midnight, when the doors are bolted, shutters locked, alarms set to catch even the smallest intrusion? But the handwriting had been urgent, almost carved into the paper, as if the pen had nearly split in the hand that wrote it. That kind of desperation is not forged in imagination. My first fortnight passed without incident. The store mostly quiet except for the strange voices over the intercom and the mannequins that seemed to sigh when no one watched. But on the 15th night, when the clock on the office wall bled past 3, I heard the sound of shoes on linoleum. They weren't hurried steps, nor were they soft enough to be mistaken for my own imagination. They were deliberate, casual, even the kind of sound made by people who know they belong in a place. At first I thought it might be a cleaner, though none were scheduled. The steps moved steadily through the women's clothing section, then into the homeware aisle, the scrape of a basket handle against metal following in their wake. I rose from my chair but stopped dead when I remembered the binder. The note, the rule. Do not approach. Do not offer help. Do not let them see you watching. My instincts battled each other. One demanded I investigate, confront, call security. The other whispered that the rule existed for a reason, and the guards who had written it had done so with the weight of terror pressing on their spines. The first figure appeared just after 3:20. I caught sight of them from the CCTV, their face blurred by the grain, as if the cameras themselves refused to focus. They wore no uniform, no jacket, just pale clothes too thin for the season, moving slowly, deliberately, placing objects in a basket. I stared at the monitor, searching for detail, but every time the head turned, the image stuttered, freezing for a heartbeat, then resuming with the face always turned away. There was no expression to read, no features to hold on to. Minutes later, Another figure emerged from the toy aisle, and then another from the escalators that should have been locked tight. They weren't together, yet they moved with the same strange rhythm, shopping silently, choosing objects with an odd deliberation. None of them spoke. None of them looked up. They drifted through the aisles as if the store were alive only for them. The most unsettling part was the way the air thickened as they appeared. A cold dampness seeping through the walls, as though the building itself acknowledged their presence. The hum of the fluorescent lights deepened to a bass throb that seemed to echo in my chest. Even the mannequins seemed to tilt slightly, watching them pass with a reverence they never gave me. I sat frozen in the office, heart hammering, until one of the figures stopped directly beneath a camera and turned upward. Though the screen blurred, though the lens fought to resist, I swear those eyes met mine through the static. A smile twitched across the face, slow and cruel, before the image distorted again and the figure moved on, as if satisfied it had been noticed. I wrote in the binder that night in my own frantic scrawl, "The customers do not shop for things. They shop for you. Stay hidden. Do not breathe loudly. Do not let them catch your reflection on the glass." It felt foolish at first, like feeding a superstition, but I had seen enough to know superstition was all that kept us alive here. By 3:45, they had begun to gather near the checkouts, their baskets filled with objects no cashier would ever ring through. Cracked mirrors, broken mannequin limbs, rolls of receipt paper unspooled across the floor. They lined up as if waiting to be served, silent and patient, facing forward in neat rows. None of them blinked. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. No exit, no sound of doors, no fading steps. The cameras blinked, stuttered, and when the feed returned, the aisles were empty, the baskets gone, the air light again. Only the faint trace of dampness clung to the air, as though something had evaporated into the walls. I did not sleep after that shift. I could not. My mind turned over the details again and again, trying to convince itself that what I had seen were ghosts, hallucinations, fragments of exhaustion. But ghosts do not smile knowingly at cameras. Hallucinations do not leave the faint smell of earth and mildew clinging to your clothes long after you've left the building. The next night, when I clocked in, I found a new note scrawled beneath the rule about customers. The handwriting was unfamiliar, jagged, not mine and not any of the earlier guards. Said simply, "They are not shoppers. They are rehearsing. Rehearsing for what I didn't want to know." But the way my blood chilled reading it, I had the horrible feeling I would find out soon enough. There are rules you obey without question. Rules that feel like the threads holding together your fragile safety in a place that should not breathe, should not whisper, should not move when left alone. For weeks, I clung to those rules as if they were scripture, never daring to test the weight behind them. But every system, no matter how ironclad, has its breaking point, and every human has their moment of weakness. Mine came on the 27th night. The shift began like the others, with the same strange tension in the air, the sense that the store itself was waiting, listening. The clock ticked towards midnight and my usual patrol began. The mannequins seemed especially restless that evening, shadows slanting over their frozen faces, joints angled as though they had shifted in the hours since I last passed. The intercom had been quiet, too quiet, and even the elevators remained obediently still. For once, the silence made me reckless. The binder was the only anchor I had, and in its pages was one rule more dire than the rest, written and underlined in a trembling hand. Never, under any circumstances, break the yellow-sealed door in the stockroom. Do not look inside. Do not enter. Do not even linger near it. I had passed that door dozens of times, its yellow tape cracked and brittle, the paint curling around the hinges, a warning that carried no explanation. And that night, as the store weighed down with silence, the door called to me. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the human compulsion to scratch at wounds, to test the limits of cages. But I lingered there too long, hand brushing the tape as if I could feel the pulse behind it. The air smelled different, damp, metallic, almost like the sharp tang of blood. I should have walked away. I should have clung to the memory of the customers who vanished at dawn, the mannequins who crept when no one looked, the voice on the intercom that knew my secrets. But temptation was heavier than fear. I peeled the tape back, came away with a sickening rip, brittle adhesive snapping like bones. The door gave without resistance, swinging inward on a groan that echoed through the stockroom like a sigh released after decades. Behind it was darkness, dense and impenetrable, deeper than the shadows of any other part of the store. My torchlight struggled to cut through it, swallowed whole within feet. First, I thought it was empty. Then I heard it. The sound of breathing, heavy, uneven, as though something vast and unseen shifted in the dark. My blood froze. The torch sputtered and revealed shapes along the walls, carvings etched into the plaster, hundreds of handprints smeared into the paint, layered upon each other like signatures of those who had stood where I stood. Some looked recent. Others had sunk so deep into the material it was as though the wall had swallowed flesh. Then movement. Not a figure exactly, but a distortion, as if the dark itself were folding forward, gathering form. The breathing grew louder, more insistent, until it matched the frantic drum of my heart. My body screamed at me to shut the door, to flee, but my limbs were traitors, frozen in place by the knowledge that I had broken something that was never meant to be touched. A whisper rolled out from the blackness, not from the intercom this time, not from the walls or mannequins, but from the space itself. My name, spoken with clarity, with intimacy, with hunger. My name repeated until it was no longer a word but a command, demanding recognition. I slammed the door. The sound reverberated like a gunshot, and the stockroom lights flickered violently. I pressed the tape back with shaking hands, as though the brittle strips could repair what I had undone. But it was too late. The breathing didn't stop. It pressed against the door, slow and deliberate, as if something on the other side now knew it had been noticed, now knew I existed. The binder did not offer comfort that night. I found no hidden note, no scribbled warning that explained what lived behind the sealed door. Only my own frantic entry filled the margin, written in shaky strokes. I broke it. I heard it. It knows me now. And perhaps the worst part was not the sound or the smell or even the voice, but the certainty that followed me for the rest of the shift, that what I had disturbed was no longer trapped behind that door. I could feel it moving through the store, settling into the mannequins, whispering through the intercom, pacing the aisles like one of the customers at 3 in the morning. I had broken the rule, and some rules, once broken, are not repaired. The last rule in the binder had always struck me as too dramatic, almost theatrical in its wording. Scribbled on a page warped by what looked like water damage, it read, "When dawn comes, use only the staff entrance. Do not attempt the fire exit. Do not take the main doors. If you find yourself in the wrong hallway, do not keep walking. The exit does not lead outside." For nearly a month, I had obeyed without question. My shift would end, the pale light of morning bleeding through the high windows, and I would slip through the staff entrance with relief so sharp it made me dizzy. But on my 30th night, after I had broken the rule of the sealed door and heard the thing that breathed in the dark, the store seemed to turn against me in ways it had not before. It began subtly. The familiar corridors twisted into new shapes. Shelves that had stood in one place for weeks were now shifted meters away, creating paths that never existed. The mannequins blocked aisles entirely, their faceless heads angled towards me as though shepherding me into narrower and narrower lanes. The intercom croaked static at random intervals, spitting out fragments of sentences I had written in the binder, as though mocking my futile attempts to warn whoever might follow. And somewhere, always just out of sight, the breathing I had unleashed moved with me, slow and steady, never hurried, never losing patience. When the clock hit 6, I gathered the binder, heart hammering, and began towards the staff exit. But the path was blocked, mannequins crowding the corridor in stiff rows. I turned, seeking another way, but each route folded back into itself like a maze. No matter how many corners I took, I arrived at the same door again and again, the fire exit paint flaking, the green sign above it glowing faintly in the weak light. I told myself not to. I told myself to wait it out, to find another path, to fight against the architecture that now bent against me. But the longer I stood, the louder the breathing became, rattling through the shelves, making the fluorescent bulbs hum violently. The store wanted me out, but not the way I knew. It wanted me through that door. Against every instinct, against every line I had memorized, I pressed the bar and stepped through. At first, relief flooded me. The rush of cool air, the promise of the outside world. But within steps, I knew. The air was wrong. Too still, too stale, as if the world itself held its breath. The light was dim. Not the golden gray of early morning, but a flat, colorless wash, neither night nor day. The car park stretched before me, yet it was empty. Not a single vehicle, not a single sign of life. The distant roads were gone, the skyline erased. Only the department store loomed behind me, its windows dark, its walls stretching higher than I remembered, higher than they had any right to. I turned to go back inside, but the door had sealed. No handle, no seam, only smooth metal where an exit had been. Panic gripped me as I ran across the car park, but the distance stretched endlessly, the horizon never growing closer. I turned in circles, searching for landmarks, but all I saw were rows upon rows of cars that weren't there a moment ago. Rusted, broken, their windows clouded with condensation from the inside. Shapes shifted behind those windows, faceless passengers waiting silently, their heads turning in unison to watch me stumble past. Then the intercom crackled again. Though there were no speakers, no walls, only the open air. My own voice spilled out, repeating the last entry I had written in the binder. I broke it. I heard it. It knows me now. The words looped again and again, filling the empty sky. I realized then what the rule had meant. The exit did not lead outside because there was no outside left for me. I had broken the boundary when I opened the sealed door, and now I was somewhere else, somewhere built from the echoes of the store and the mistakes of those who had come before. The car's windows rattled softly, fog smearing into handprints against the glass. Every door clicked open in unison, hinges groaning. Figures began to climb out, slow and deliberate, their pale clothes stained, their movements patient. They were the customers, the mannequins, the voices from the intercom, all merging into one endless congregation. They were rehearsing no longer. They were ready. I ran, though I knew it was useless. The air thickened with the sound of breathing, vast and heavy, pressing against my back. The figures advanced steadily, their heads tilting in unnatural synchrony. Above me, the sky flickered like the failing lights of the store, and the intercom whispered one last invitation, sweet and certain. Welcome to the exit. And as they closed in, I understood the cruelest rule of all. There is no leaving this place. Once you've seen what waits in the dark, the doors will always open. Not to outside, not to safety, but to where the store keeps its secrets, where it keeps us.